Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Adam. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Things, are running. Stuff is going. The winter is coming. We're preparing for the spirits of the snow, or whatever they called.
Mm-hmm. And our class is still going well?
Classes are going well, and it's always this challenge of convincing students that it's worthwhile doing difficult stuff. So I find that as a thing that I find increasingly difficult today. There is this attitude: everything has to be easy, everything has to be, bite-sized, like a snack that you just take on the way. And the same for actually science or learning techniques or learning math or learning harder topics. And basically, I'm spending some time and actually explaining that there are things that are worthwhile learning, and they're not easy. And you have to dig in, and it's like climbing a mountain. You don't like it when you look up and you think, "Oh my God, will I climb this mountain or not?" And then when you're up there, then you think, "Okay, it was worth it." So it's similar. And unlike a mountain, where after the climb you have to go down again and manage to do that in one piece, um, which is, we know, much more dangerous actually than climbing up. In math, you don't have to climb down, right? You climb up and stay there, continue your way. So if I would phrase what I'm talking about, I would say it's worthwhile to look at difficulties in technique and in method as something that makes you better, gives you better overview, and it's worth investing. Your brain actually, I use this word with care, levels up doing so. It's really leveling up. When you play a game and you defeat a difficult monster, you level up. And if you understand a concept that you didn't understand before, you see how you do things that you didn't understand before, and suddenly it starts making sense, you level up. And I also think that there are these kind of this oscillation of understanding. There's a technical understanding when you know how to do things, you make them work, but you don't understand how they interact. Then you start understanding how they interact, and then you have to learn the techniques on the higher level again. And then again, you oscillate between technical achievement and putting things together on the larger scale. And this repeats itself. And the more often you manage to do that, the better your understanding and the deeper your understanding will be. But the big problem is today, there seems to be a big emphasis on just understanding on the surface, and that's enough. And it's not if you want to be good at what you do.
Even encouraged, like lionized, where I mean, it's like like this idea of like an extended mind. I mean, it's true. Like it is a game changer to have the internet now, and this should change our learning styles. But to actually have gone on that journey of like having a piece of knowledge as a skill that you can work with, it's hard to see a substitute for that, or even sometimes memorization of facts, like even if they're retrievable in theory from a database, will that fact be there when you needed it? And I mean, even if you memorize it, if you don't memorize it in like a way where it's portable knowledge, like it still can get trapped as like latent knowledge. But if you've never memorized it at all, then it might not be likely to provide the constraint when you need it on your thinking, like to generate the source of a hypothesis or a counter. Like, no, that doesn't work. Like, yeah, it does seem to be that there's a potentially like important message of we should learn differently now that, as knowledge explodes and we can search more. But I don't know how different. It seems like we might still be pretty constrained in a lot of what we've tended, the way, like the learning of a skill and the way you're describing, also a good amount of memorization. it still might be essential. I don't know, for some time.
I
Maybe
think that,
will prove me wrong, you know.
no, it's a very good point. I mean, it's good that you bring it up, and I think it also feeds into our understanding how cognition works. I mean, I forgot who it was. I don't want to blame Socrates. Maybe he wasn't saying that, but one of the classic scientists or philosophers says books are bad because they make people lazy. They stop memorizing. I thought that was really hilarious. So people always were skeptical about external ways of storing information. They were always worried about people not using the memory sufficiently. I don't think, therefore, this is the problem. The problem is not that we store and communicate now knowledge more by videos rather than books, possibly. I don't think this is the problem. I think the problem is that we have to take care that we do not neglect our own mental hygiene and our own mental exercise. So the thing that I'm worried about is that, different from what books were used to in the past, now there are few centralized players that control these videos, that control the sources at which you can get your information, which creates incentives. I'm not saying the companies are evil or something. What I'm saying is, but there are incentives to favor material that is not necessarily built in the way that is ideal for mental development. And it doesn't mean that this is intentional. So it's just emerging as a phenomenon that it's a material that is 3 minutes long has an advantage over material that is 20 minutes long by nature. So for 20 minutes long material, you really have to grip people and suck them into your material. And it has to be like a movie, like a movie where you really want to see what happens next. And the adventure of scientific discovery does not usually work like that. So it's not that easy to do this effect with science. It's much harder to do. So I feel that we need to learn how to use this external medium of learning, of today's media, to keep minds sharp. And it's a bit like maps, using Google Maps or something. It's a fantastic tool. Let's face it, it's a fantastic tool. The problem is, if you use it by looking at it all the time, you essentially don't memorize anything. Google Maps does the job for you. Your brain does not work. So what does work for me, at least, is I look at it, try to memorize what happens next, try to create a model, and then try to predict where I'm going to go. And after a while, I will then recalibrate myself by looking at the maps, which you would do with a paper map too, right? So you can actually find a good balance between externalized and internalized modeling. And if you look at, for example, a language, right? You could actually use a language where you translate every word by a dictionary, or say by Google Translate or something like that on the way. Or you could use the language and learn it really perfectly. Or you can be somewhere in between. So you know many words, so you can get around. And when it becomes special, then you can look up extra words that you may want to need. So I feel that we don't spend enough time to understand where on this sliding scale of internalized versus externalized knowledge do we want to stay. And I would say the rule is, if the knowledge is stable, so the knowledge is not changing and you are going to use it for a long time, you want to internalize it. If you move to France, you want to learn French. That's definitely what you want to do. If you go to France for a vacation, probably not the point learning French properly. You could learn what I would call tourist French and use the automatic translator for the rest, for example. If you just have to read a quick French email, probably even that is I would say overkill. You may want just to translate it and forget about the rest. So in short, the use case determines, and the time scales determine, do you want the knowledge to be external to your cognition or internal? Because turning external knowledge into internal one on a long scale is expensive.
It's not clear to me that this is a good policy, but earlier you were mentioning to me this like idea of like something is hard, and like you're playing a piece on piano, and there's a passage, and specifically like where you would want to avoid it or rush through it, that's the one you stop, you drill it, you eventually come to love it. But it's that one pain point. And I'm wondering, like in general with knowledge, like if there's one where you find yourself reaching with a feeling of anxiety or something like this, that's the one you want to stop, memorize, even though it's like maybe the last thing you want to do. That's the one, like that would be worth that expense.
This is precisely the phenomenon. Yes. Now that you say it, it's obvious. I didn't think about that like this, but yes. And
Well,
that is
I wish
exactly.
it weren't. I wish you were about to say no, that's wrong, because it's not easy.
Well, you know, this is, you just hit the point, right? I mean, I will not, you know, I will argue with you with, and if I disagree, but I actually, unfortunately, I do agree with you. What I apologize for agreeing. In fact, this is exactly what I do when I come to more mathematical topics in my lecture. I see that the students are, they are discomforted. They don't like that in general, and somehow there's this thing, this drill in school or in society. Mathematics is difficult, it's unpleasant, it's somehow a torture by which the elder generations just want to torture people to make them unhappy.
It's just an elaborate sadistic hazing scheme. That's it.
Exactly. Yes. It's a hazing. It's a hazing. Mathematics is hazing in a way. That is the attitude. And now there is, of course, this elite of people, or what is considered to be an elite of people that love this. So they are a little bit crazy. It's a bit like getting tattoos and liking it, right? It's painful, but yeah, you like to have these tattoos. So mathematics is like getting tattoos. But the point that I'm trying to make is to get non-obsessive students that don't actually generally like it, to appreciate the point of it. So the key here is to give them understanding that this actually gives you tools that you did not have before. They're not comparable with anything else that you have, unless learning a new language, if you like. But it's more than a new language, because, you know, new languages, essentially French and English and Japanese, it's still the same type of freedom that you have in doing things. But when you learn math, it's a new dimension. It's something else. It's opening a world for you that is otherwise not accessible. And in fact, there's a story by Stanislav Lem who phrased it very nicely. It says mathematics is just really doing something else. It's really opening a different universe that is suddenly becoming accessible to you. And the funny thing is, I observed it several times when you do relatively abstract stuff and you do it properly and you give them this feeling that, oh, I can do this thing now. And there's something happens that I can talk about things in a way that's more rigorous, that's more universal, that's more powerful, and it means something. And lo and behold, it's even useful sometimes. The important part is it's not always useful. We don't have to have it useful. It's sometimes useful. And I think when I see that happening, I feel, okay, now we're talking. And I'm talking about students who are not natural mathematicians or people who love that by nature. It's something, students that actually don't care about it. They don't, and then they suddenly make this transition and start liking the fact that you can do these things, get these logical statements, and things work out, and you get the statement that you thought, where does this come from? And I feel this is something that I really enjoy doing. because you really see a qualitative change in how they see mathematics. It's not just, as you say, it's not a hazing ritual. It's actually magic. So one type of magic we humans actually do have. Yeah, people read Harry Potter because they can do all these weird things that can do stuff, but
I mean,
mathematics.
mathematics, you know, all of a sudden we could cross continents, level cities, footsteps appeared on the moon. Would not have
Yes.
happened without mathematics. But you're also saying in addition to like this, like, I mean, so there's like, I guess like a concrete empowerment of achieving particular engineering goals, of understanding and structuring thought in a particular domain, and also more grand engineering goals like crossing continents and leveling cities and putting people on outside the planet. But it seems like you're also saying there's an artistic appreciation, also like a math for math's sake, and this seems to be not necessarily in conflict, but a different motivation. And does that come like later, or like when is that, or is that just a separate motivation?
It's a really interesting question, right? I mean, one way, I mean, there are many ways of talking about math and why it's cool. But if people ask me, why do you like math? And sometimes I do the following, not always. I'm asking, do you like Sudoku? Sudoku? Yeah, sure, I like Sudoku. I play it occasionally. I say, you see, mathematics is like Sudoku, except that it's useful. You solve a puzzle. You manage to put things together. Stuff happens. I mean, one example that is I think very nice, and I think Singh brings it up in his book about the discovery of the proof of Fermat's last theorem, where he mentioned the 16 puzzle or the 15 puzzle, where you have these pieces which you move, these tiles that you can move. There's one empty slot and you can move around. And where this guy, this editor, actually has a prize for whoever gets that thing in order. He sets out a price of $1,000 or whatever it was at that time. It was a lot of money. And people were basically going crazy and just playing this game, trying to solve it. And then there's a simple proof that this is impossible. I mean, impossible. It's not like you missed the solution. It's not like, oh, you just try enough. No, it's impossible. Whatever you do, if you play according to the rules, you cannot do it. Now, this is a very strong statement. How does it work? And it's magic. Again, mathemagic. Some people say that. Because you have invariants. What is an invariant? You change the position of these things and you compute an invariant, and you can show whenever you move a tile, this invariant does not change. And you show that the invariant looks different for the initial position of the tiles that you are given by the editor and the target position of the tiles. And because every switch, every move of a tile keep the invariant fixed, it's very clear you cannot possibly get from one position to the other. They are living in different universes. That's always the truth. And what I really like about that is it's so simple. The idea is very, very simple. Everybody can in principle understand it. And yet, it makes a statement about something that's not intuitive at all, right? Why shouldn't we be able to move from this position to that position? Suddenly, you have transformed it into something that lives in a different space, looks different, you think differently, and it tells you, yeah, you can't do that. And that, in my opinion, is something that is clearly above human conception. People always ask, is mathematics being discovered or is it constructed? And you see that, to me, it looks really like neither and both. It's neither constructed nor discovered. It's a mixture. It's a weird mixture of both.
With this example of the proof, the impossibility proof, that you're suggesting like even the form of it that isn't necessarily too complicated. Would this be an example of a proof that I know there's some automatic like machine assisted theorem proving. Would this be an example of one where the proof would be unlikely to be discovered by one of those programs? Like, is this like an AI, like a strong AI complete? Like, are there classes of mathematical proofs that lend themselves to automation? And there's some where it's like, it's not even necessarily the complexity of the proof. It's like the specificity of the target is requiring something, a different, not just like interpolating between data points and do it, but like a different type of extrapolation.
Well, this is a very interesting question. I mean, let me just to make that concrete. These automated provers have a lot in common with chess playing or game playing AI. It's not identical, of course, but they have these rules and they play by the rules. They have heuristics and they search solutions and so on. Now, they are quite clever. Let's not underestimate that. But if we look at, for example, chess playing software, there are certain positions in chess where you say, this is a chess position. Can you win? And they are built in such a way where a human with very mediocre chess abilities can see immediately, or after short contemplation, that it's impossible to win. You can always hold off the opponent. Or you can see that you can win because you see a plan, while the machines don't. The reason for that is the machines are local. They're thinking locally normally. They don't understand what they are seeing. They play around all the possibilities, and which are a lot of possibilities. It branches out a lot, but they don't see the principle. I can't predict, of course, whether finding invariants is something that machines cannot in principle do, if it has been prepared for it, or if there are ways of actually making them generate this idea. So if I am a proof designer of automated proof concept, automated proof machines, I would certainly consider the possibility of implementing an invariant generator. Right, that's something I would do as a part of the process. What you're probably asking is a bigger question: is there any chance that a machine could discover it by itself? Something like that. I assume that's your question. Now, in my opinion, there is this big discussion, symbolism versus connectionism, and some people say, oh, everything is low level, or some things are innate, and some things are symbolic, and I have a slightly different take on that. And again, I like to be a bit oblique in these things. I always say, take the quantum superposition. I always take this kind of, give me two pure states. I say, oh, give me an entangled version of that, right? I don't do it to be contrarian. What I think is, we do not understand the nature of concept formation. We do not understand the nature of how do you get from soft, woolly, imprecise data, the extraction of hard concepts with which we can actually apply a rule system and get new concepts. The people who talk about rule generation, they have, or they're tempted to talk about an a prioristic view of rules. I don't believe that. I don't believe that rules are a prioristic, right? I don't believe in a Platonic heaven. I don't believe in that. The opposite. I believe the world is
They're not
the
just
world
given
physical,
to us fully formed. Yeah, they're not just given to us like fully formed, freshly shaved as after they sprung out of Zeus's side, and they're perfectly. It's that they're tools that we have constructed.
They are tools we have constructed. They are purifications of things we have seen in dirty fashion.
Yeah, you were talking about, is math discovered or And then you were saying
Exactly.
yes. You're giving me the superposition of yes.
Exactly. It's a mixture. It's neither nor. And the reason for that, of course, these rules, once you clean them up, they behave according to their own principles, right? They don't bow down to what you want them to do, right? When you find paradoxa, like the square root of 2, it's not a fraction. That's a paradoxon. The legend says that Pythagoras drowned his student because of that, or told him to drown himself because his student showed that the square root of 2 is not a fraction. And Pythagoras was totally infuriated. He was livid. Whether it's true or not, that's not so important. What's much more important is that you have this phenomenon. This phenomenon is not something that humans created. It's something that has its own rules. There's a nice analogon actually in literature again, and that's the never-ending story by Michael Ende, which is a very funny name given that he wrote the never-ending story. His name is actually End. His German name Ende is actually End, which is, you know, a nice counterposition. So in the story, there's this hero or anti-hero that enters the story, and the world, this fantastic world, emerges out of his own dreams or expectations or wishes. The funny part is that many of the things just happen, and they're not exactly as he intended them to be, right? He has a wish and something comes to pass, but the rules according to which it happens is not the rules that he would like to have. Something else happens there. And that's how mathematics is, right? We may be the ones who polish the diamond that comes out of the rough, dirty data of the real world, but the diamond still has its own rules. Therefore, it's half a construction and half a discovery, neither in its purest form. It's neither pure construction and neither pure discovery. Pure construction is usually quite boring, right? That you have that sometimes, but the best pieces of art, even if we don't talk about math, the best pieces of art are things where whoever made that piece of art did not actually think of all the levels that this opens up. Mathematics, good theorems are like that. They open up all kinds of weird levels of implications that are not something that necessarily, I mean, some very clever scientists may have seen that, but then Bach has seen all the implications of his fugues, and okay, I mean, this is Bach or Gödel or Grothendieck. I mean, okay, we are living on, these are really people with a mind on a different level. But normally there are theorems that are more powerful than whatever even the inventors have seen. The discoverers. I use the word inventors and discoverers in mathematics as nearly synonymous, because a theorem also needs to be invented to some extent. You need to say, this is an interesting theorem. I can come up with all kinds of true statements that can be proven, and they're not really theorems. They're not interesting. So theorems have a form that says, this is actually an interesting thing to look at. So they are half constructed and half discovered.
So there's, in terms of the ways we could approach the world and the range of our interests, in theory, this is unbounded. Like you could approach it, and so there's like a good amount of construction in terms of what you brought together in which ways, where you're choosing to focus. But even if it's an unbounded space, that doesn't mean anything goes. There's still structures, things that can be combined coherently or not. And this is not, and there's a kind of objectivity about this now. This is a kind of independent, a reality of its own realm of forms, if you will. And even though we can access it and make construction from it in a way that's unlimited, you know, we will not exhaust it. in the age of the universe, it's still though, there are still things that work and things that don't. There are still truths, if you will, that would be independent of any given, any one of our interests. Potentially.
Exactly. And this is what I think is so weird about mathematics. Even weirder is that it is to strong extent, to surprisingly far extent, it's actually making statements about the reality, right? Okay, I mean, if you look at Euclidean geometry, I think I made the point before, Euclidean geometry is not a purely cerebral game. It is born out of observations. People observed, saw certain phenomena like straight lines, angles, points in the real world, and distilled this brilliant achievement of Euclid. He distilled these observations into the 5 axioms. I think it's 5 axioms. And that is an amazing achievement. Everything else comes from there. But the point is, these observations are still real observations about real objects. Mathematics may look completely different if the world would not have been as, straight lined as it is. Or it might not need it actually to have any geometry. If you are an E. coli and you live as a flagellum organism in a world that has no concept of a straight line because you simply can't see that far, you can't go straight that far, this is just not possible for you, maybe we wouldn't have Euclidean geometry. We still might be able to count, perhaps, who knows, right? So an octopus might have a harder problem with Euclidean geometry. I make this point, I think I made this point before, because an octopus cannot see a straight line for very far, because underwater, you probably, if the water is very clear, you have 20 meters and that's it. So in other words, what we need to really ask ourselves, how come that mathematics is actually working on scales of the size of the universe? There's no reason for that. No reason for that.
It's almost unreasonable.
Sorry?
It's unreasonably effective.
It's unreasonably effective, and Einstein has put this question forward. There's several other people who have put this question. I personally think we start getting to a point where we might start to get the first tools to answer this question.
So, okay, so I definitely want to get into the tools for the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. And something, don't necessarily to resolve this now, but this, the math for math's sake, and there's a kind of sense of deep aesthetics and reverence, even like, so the impulse of, you're just saying, of Pythagoras, like it's almost blasphemous, the square root of 2. Like you're an apostate, but not just in like a, not necessarily even in like, these are the rules, how dare you violate them, just because we're following rules to follow rules, but almost as if like something precious has been handled wrongly. And so I guess what I'm wondering, the different types of persons and sources of this sense of reverence for mathematical forms. So it's like, I'm thinking of a couple different things. Like one is like almost kind of analogous to like a lust to love transition, where it's like, it might initially be like the power solving and the problems, but then like eventually it's like, it deepens and takes on a more general texture. And it's just like, this is a place that's wholesome and good, and you adjust yourself and grow together. Other things are like, you're talking about like this Sudoku, like this like very rapid, powerful compressions as things snap into clarity. And so like initially there might be this period of like, I don't know what's going on. This is, I've now that I know this problem, I even know who I am now. Like maybe I'm not capable of doing things. And then that feeling of grip and clarity and things coming into harmony, just, and like just that being so intense that on its own, it inspires a kind of reverence. Or is it like the unreasonableness of it? Is that what are, it seems complicated, like the type of person and the reasons that, so many people that they just live in this like dread of math, but there's another way of approaching where it's you learn to love it. But it doesn't seem simple. It seems like as rich and complicated as like our love of music. It seems in each other even like it's. And one more thought is you're talking about like the preconditions. So this one's I don't believe this. I'll say it anyways. You're talking about like the preconditions, like what makes math even possible. And I'm wondering, like, so you're saying like you're in the ocean and there's like lines of sight or like things are moving around. Is it actually, in a way, some of what's happening with grappling with mathematical forms, like continues with like fundamental ways of being embedded in the world and having a grip on things? And it's like the reason that math works might even be continuous with like what we need just to be in the world at all. So it's like the very thing that makes math possible is also the thing that like lets us achieve any goals and exist, if I will, empowerment, like your ability to have grips and options, and there to be a certain stability and predictability that you can work within. But it's also like, not completely predictable. So you're finding your limits and working, at the edge where you don't quite have the grip, and then trying to discover them. That was a lot of things, but I'm just like this love and this beauty of math, this love of math, like this seems like a very deep thing. I can come in it from the outside, and I can appreciate it some, but I'm not of the church, and so.
Well, Sigmund Freud had this concept of the aha effect. Okay, so to come back to what you actually said, this kind of moment of where, oh, I understand that now. I doubt that the aha effect something that many organisms have. I do think maybe some apes, elephants, crows, etc., the top-notch elements, the top-notch organisms might have that. There's a beautiful video of a young orangutan watching magic, where the guy makes things disappear, and the orangutan behaves, if it was a human, you would immediately say that it laughs. I mean, you really can't say it differently. It really laughs. It's enjoying himself. Something weird happened, right? The aha effect, in my opinion, is the opposite of that, right? So, or the counterpart. In magic, the aha effect is something happens that you didn't expect can happen, and does make sense, and you don't know how it happened, and you didn't expect it to happen. The aha effect is the opposite. Is kind of things that don't make sense suddenly makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of things come together in a very clever way. Very fascinating formula. I don't think when you go down the scale of intelligence that it still happens. So I'm not even sure that dogs can experience it. Maybe dogs might occasionally see that. There's a level of phase transition and understanding that links with the aha effect. I do think that is the thing that we like it about math, because we get aha effects all the time. We get them all the time. Every time we solve a problem, every time we finish a proof, every time it works and things fit together the way we expected it fit together, it's an aha effect.
If you're just surprised by something just working, something happens that for a reason you don't know why, it'll be exciting, but that's more of an but then it's like when the thing resolves suddenly, the before you did not understand, that's the aha. And there's like almost like a triumph to the ha.
Yes.
Like an initial like uncertainty and then a ha.
Yes, exactly. But the surprise is different from normal surprise. It is a surprise about your own achievement. So it's quite self-reflective, and it's not just like, oh, surprise, magic, as we said, right? Magic disappeared, surprise. But there's an element of it where your brain now is part of the surprise itself. Your brain generates the surprise, if you like. Things coalesce. Yeah, it's a bit like you look at an image, and I tell you, in this image, you see a beach and the sun and this and that, and I say I don't see anything. It looks like just a messy set of lines. And I say, well, look at the lines from that side, or look at the lines in this eye, or turn the picture around or something. Something happens where your top-down system does not match with the bottom-up. At some point, they suddenly match up. I do think that's kind of what happens here. There's a top-down and there's a bottom-up search, and they suddenly link together, and suddenly everything is coherent. So if I were to describe it, if I were to model it, that's probably how I would go about it.
But related to your own actions, your own available action set, your
Probably.
condition. There's this paper I'm going to send you, which I think actually you might be the only person who would know to provide a principled understanding of this one. It's by this, I think it's Redgraves et al. 2008 on phasic dopamine signals and their sources. And
Okay.
it's kind of arguing against standard reward prediction error stories for this source of phasic dopamine. This is specifically the nigra, so it's like motor dopamine, but because it's like there's such low latency signals, the idea is like the outcome you're not ready for. So it's actually taking a different type of information into account. And I believe the claim is it's helping you to discover unexpected things that you were the cause of.
Okay.
And anyway, so I haven't looked at this paper in a while, but I'll be sending that over to you because I
So
think.
what's the mechanism again, if you can go in more detail?
So it's rusty, but it's something like so you're getting this, I think, information from the superior colliculus about your overall orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Then if an event, and you don't even know what the event is because the latency is so quick, the idea is like, but you expected something to happen there, and then something, you don't know what it is, happened though, and you were oriented right, and this is conditioned on your action, but, and this is like basically the idea is a kind of learning curriculum for helping you to discover the things within your control. And so it's basically, it's planning as inference, but of an empowered variety from this mechanism as an inductive bias. And so I almost never hear people talk about this study. But I think it's profound potentially. This would be potentially one of the, at least for the vertebrate brain, potentially a major inductive bias for empowerment.
That makes absolute sense, right? You want to know, have I done this? Right? Is it linked to me? I mean, I have often enough seen cats jumping on shelves and dropping objects and then get scared by their own action. So they don't clearly make the link, right? Maybe because the fallen object takes a bit too much time for it to be linked. So the cat jumps up, the vase falls down, and that takes, because of the gravity, it takes half a second or 0.3 seconds or whatever it is it needs to reach the ground. But that's already too long for the cat to realize that it was my jump that actually made this happen. Although sometimes I have the impression that cats are a little bit solipsistic, so they don't actually care too much. They get scared about that, but they don't care that it was them that actually did that.
It seems almost like the way people describe it, they would use sometimes like the projection of embarrassment, but they're sort of interpreting like a general loss of confidence from the cat. So it's like the cat starts to kind of like move through the world with a little bit less confidence, but it doesn't know why. It's not necessarily linked to the thing, but they'll say like it's embarrassed about what just happened. But it's not clear the cat knows what happened or what in any causal sequence. So that might even be actually part of the overall uneasiness. Like the cat is not modeling like that sort of dependencies.
Either doesn't model it because this is not a typical situation. The cat doesn't move in a world where there are fragile objects that make a lot of noise when they fall down. Or the link is too slow, right? Because if the link is immediate, I do think the cat would make the link. So for example, the cat would jump up and you hear a shooting noise immediately. This is the experiment that one would have to do. I'm not sure whether the ethics committee would let it through, but a cat jumps onto the shelf. Immediately their shot is heard, and the cat basically gets an immediate feedback signal. And the question is whether this would work better than an object that falls down with a delay of, say, half a second. Embarrassment is definitely, I agree with that. There's a fantastic case of this tiger who jumps onto a log in the river and slips, right? And it's not very graceful. The slip is not very graceful, right? The tigers move very gracefully, but it slips. And the funny part is the tiger starts looking around. Has anyone seen me? It's really like that, right? Like, okay, who do you care about? You're the tiger, you're the boss here. And no, did anybody see me?
It's like they had that move, you're walking down the street, your foot catches on something, and it's like, you look around.
Yeah. But as a human, I can see that you're social and you're not at the top of the chain necessarily. But the tiger, really, being embarrassed as a tiger, who cares? You're the absolute boss. You can do whatever you want. Nevertheless, obviously, they have a certain pride and they actually seem to have to project it. They feel they have to project it. So even tigers can get self-conscious. I found that totally hilarious.
So there's some types of, in terms of causal discovery and explanations being available to a learner, a modeler, there's some that could be potentially realized, I don't know if you'd say heuristically, with certain like mechanisms, like maybe like this latency and orienting, and then reinforcement or not of this, of the policies for controlling the orienting and associated actions. But also there seems to be another in terms of this aha of more explicitly having a causal self model and then referencing things to this causal self model and with some sort of entertainment of counterfactuals also. And this might be particularly well developed in humans and maybe some other particularly sophisticated creatures like that orangutan potentially. But this tiger in its self-consciousness, it might be like to the extent that like it is linking things to its own action in some way or getting a sense of embarrassment or not. It seems like would this maybe more be of like the heuristic variety, like does an apex predator, I guess it exists among other apex predators potentially, but like if you're largely solitary, how much of a self model do you need? Like, can you just like there's some game theory in the hunt, but it's like, I don't know how much there is. Like,
well, the question is, why does a tiger roar? Sometimes it's just to scare the prey and to scare it into submission, right? It's very clear that roaring is not increasing your chances of catching the prey. And sometimes many big cats actually hunt from behind. They prefer not to attack frontally. We do know that basically pumas in the US, they don't like to attack from the front because it's always dangerous, right? The prey could actually fight back and could be, but in some cases, actually giving a roar prepares the prey tries to scare the prey. It doesn't always work, of course, right? So it's always a bet. And you see that, for example, in war, you have always this situation, this decision: do we do stealthy attacks, or do we do attacks where we show how powerful we are and we are going to smash you all and to strike fear into the opponent? And we see both. Both are viable strategies that don't always work. They can go wrong big time. So when you look at, for example, the Romans versus the Germans, we know that the Germans had the so-called Barditus, or it was called something like that, where they would create this roar and really scary singing, which should strike fear in their enemies. Of course, with the Romans, it didn't work because they were disciplined, knew how to do the battle, and so they would go into battle roar not. But for an enemy that is less disciplined, that may work. that they may think, that's dangerous, or
So if like you have two sides and they're roughly well matched. If there's one initial asymmetry in power, that can tend to snowball. And that you start to take out more of their people, and then you can take out even more, and they can provide to the extent that they don't because of their vulnerable position, maybe find new courage and push back, which I'm sure happens. But so it's the Romans would just hold the phalanx. And so if it's two tribes kind of roughly evenly well matched coming at each other, if you can get them to hesitate for a second or turn around, or they're distracted, they're not watching each other's backs in the right way, then you can start to get that snowballing of advantage. But if you're dealing with disciplined soldiers in a phalanx and you roar at them and they're ready for them, they hold that line, didn't work. It's
didn't work. Exactly. You just revealed your position.
That's all you've done.
And it's actually, it goes even beyond that. I really think games are a very good model for many things relevant to life, because games are precarious. You said already, finding new courage and so on. So it's a very interesting question. There are different types of games. There are games when you are winning, then, as you say, it's snowballing. So it's exponentially increasing your power. But it's not always the case, right? It can go two ways. Number one, you could actually run beyond your resources. So an offensive is always weakening yourself, right? Every offensive weakens yourself. And the point is that you have in an offensive, you are racing the advantages of your offensive against the weakening that your offensive causes. So when you have for example, attack that moves very fast into enemy territory, you have an advantage, of course, from the attack, but you are racing against the failures of your logistics. So your logistics has to catch up. The faster you advance, the more difficult that becomes. And that can actually cause you to lose. Sorry, yeah.
Oh, there's a tension between pushing your advantage but overextending yourself.
Yes.
So it's here you're okay, if I keep going now is the time, but you're
An offensive is like borrowing time, right? So you essentially borrow initiative, and you have to pay back the debt before the enemy can call it. Basically, that's kind of the point. So you have basic competition of two opposing things. It's a credit. You take a credit. So when they attack very fast, whether it's in chess, whether it's in war, whether it's in Go, whether it's in any game, or in many games, when you attack, usually you take a credit. You open a credit line, and now you build up debt. And the question is, when will this debt be called? In the defensive, you don't do that. You save. But the point is, you may actually lose more in total anyway. You may put stuff on your savings account, but it doesn't help you. So, but it's easier. That's why defense is an easier position to take than an attack. Attack is always a little bit more difficult. Where the defense has a problem is, of course, it knows less, right? So defense is good, strong, when your intelligence is good. So the better you know what's going to happen, the stronger you can make your defense. Defense can be very effective if the intelligence is high. And this is, by the way, one reason why sometimes armies don't like to have too much intelligence. If they want the army to be offensive and aggressive, they prefer to keep them actually in the dark. Because when you know where your enemy is, that invites actually defensive mentality. Because
so defensive mentality more one of exploiting the known territory you're working within, and the known resources with more clear plans with maybe somewhat more extended rollouts. But if you're on the offense and that's not your territory, you don't know exactly what you're entering. You might have a sense, but once it encounters confrontation with the enemy, and also just you haven't lived there. This is a place you're less familiar with. You have to have this flexible adaptation about you because of unknown unknowns you're encountering. But if you're pushing hard in there, that's costly. That's
as an offense, in the offense, you prefer to create uncertainty to your opponent in any case. Anyway, you could prefer to create uncertainty to your opponent, but I think in the offensive it's more important because you essentially want them. Defensive means you are risk averse. The defensive is usually risk averse. You want to reduce risk. Reducing risk means you want to know better what's going on. So in an offensive, you want to actually make the opponent confused. You want to create a situation where the opponent is either unsure about its defense or is forced to accept the fog of war and therefore forced into moving out of a defensive position. And I'm talking not just about war, it could be chess, it could be anything. It's a principle of games per se. It's very universal, actually, in a way. And this is, by the way, to close the loop to what we said before, one of the problems of machine intelligence systems that play games. They don't understand what they're doing. They just play according to the rules, perfectly so, but they don't. I don't see them actually extracting rules for that. And maybe there is some advancement in mathematical theorems to extract rules, but the problem is really that's not how we do it. Humans do it differently. They extract the rules on a different level. They don't extract rules by manipulating symbols. The symbol manipulation comes later. It's essentially a bookkeeping for the things we are doing, and it's not well defined. It's a bit like, what's bookkeeping? I have sheep and they run around and they do stuff here and there and there, and then finally I decide, okay, I take this clay tablet and put a marker in for the sheep I have.
Were you saying this is almost like a dual phase iterated process of like concretization and then abstraction and relating? But then
Yes.
as you move, but there's like an iterative two-stage, this is like a dual phase to it.
This is precisely it. Yes, yes. Stated better than I could have said. Yes. It oscillates because you essentially move out from the concrete, play with the rules, and then try to extract things again, make them, make them gel again, and then play the game again. So the interesting part about that is really that, first of all, that it works. Second, I do think that formal creativity is very strongly linked to that. Because the world is not clean. It's not clean. We talked already about Pythagoras. Now I'm returning to him like the dog returns to the food to the food in the kitchen. Pythagoras started music theory, right? I mean, he made this idea that nice harmonies are harmonies which have a fractional waves, where you have wire and you make a sound with that, and then basically when you take half, you have an octave, and we have a full fraction. Then these sounds are nice. This is the basic for all the, say, European harmony theory. Now, the interesting part of that is it's not working perfectly, because when you start doing transposition, go into a different scale, move away, it gets weirder and weirder. At some point, it doesn't work anymore. And when people decided to develop instruments that are no long string instruments, which completely where you can move wherever you want on the scale, but actually keyboard instruments, where when you play a key, that's digital. You have to decide, this is my tone and that's what I have, and this is how many splits I can do. Suddenly we're forced to fit in this whole fractional harmony idea into these 12 tones. And then the invention of the well-tempered piano did that. But the well-tempered piano was a very ugly solution to the beautiful problem by Pythagoras. I think Pythagoras would have drowned that guy too, because instead of actually having these
Drowned
lines.
Bach. That's
Hmm?
a Pythagoras would have drowned Bach.
Not Bach, but the inventor of the well-tempered scaling, because what that person did was taking the 12th root of 2 and use that as a basis for the scale. Now, this is absolutely a piece of genius. It also required recognition that you actually can come close to the perfect fractions by doing so. You come close enough that if you have a piano in a grand piano in a concert hall, the best pianist in the world will actually play on this and not say, oh, this is horrible, I can't play on this instrument. They will actually play it because it's good enough. And there are all kinds of other tricks they do, but the idea is absolutely ingenious. But it also highlights the discrepancy between the idealized Platonic world of how harmonies should actually look like versus what you can actually do with a limited technology that you have. And interestingly, there was a group many years ago. I forgot the name of the group. I'm afraid it was at the University of Darmstadt in Germany, and they had keyboard, which was an electronic keyboard, which would actually move along perfect harmonic lines. So when you would play a cadenza, it would actually do the same thing as a good a cappella choir would do. It would actually move along the pure harmonics, not keeping the tones fixed according to the predefined pitches of the keys, but it actually would adapt the keys to whatever harmonics happened before. There seems to be a cadenza by Brahms, it seems, that when you sing it as a choir, you move away from the original tone by a quarter note. So if you repeat this cadenza again and again and again, you repeat it 4 times, you go away by 1 note. I forgot whether it goes down or up. I forgot which way it goes. But the point is, you can do that on this keyboard. You could do that on the keyboard and it would actually move. It would, you would really hear how the pitch moves away. So there is clearly a discrepancy between the clear-cut 12 pitches that a standard fixed keyboard has versus what you actually do if you have the freedom of choosing harmonic only transitions.
I'm gonna pick your brain later about whether the way in which the hippocampal system tiles space and has any parallels here. Won't be able to get into it today, but this sort of like laying down a certain granularity of a metric carving up of space within which you're but this inducing some distortions as you do so. So something for later to talk about.
Excellent.
So I guess we're out of time for today, but I very much enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you very much for having me at your place or at your Zoom, and it was an enjoyable conversation.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Adam.